So we'll be focusing on how all these pro-inflammatory cytokines have a major effect on multiple layers of thought and feeling. And if you have multiple traumas, how does that affect you? So one of the places I was in the last couple of months is in the Middle East. So we were training the aid workers of the Syrian refugees. So in Jordan, you probably have heard there's roughly about 1.5 million Syrian refugees. This is a country of 7 million people. And half of the population are Palestinians, so they are refugees. And then you get the Iraqi refugees, you know, from the Iraq War, and now the Syrian refugees. So you've got a population there of a lot of traumatized people. Not everybody developed PTSD, of course, but our effort was to come up with some kind of methodology to reach them and help them on a cross-cultural basis. In other words, how can you communicate to them and help them go through the whole process of healing without confusing them with all this psychobabble that we're so into? I mean, psychotherapists are into a huge amount of theoretical psychobabble. And so what we were doing was teaching the aid workers brain-based methods of helping somebody understand what happened to them. Everybody knows they have a brain, and most of the people that have gone through these terrible series of tragedies, it's not just ISIS, it's multiple other tragedies that preceded it with, you know, Assad and others. And now these people lost their family members, and they're just confused and feeling very, you know, raw and terrible. How do you help people like that? Remember I said that you spend roughly 30% of your waking hours daydreaming, ruminating? That's a lot of time. Huge amount of time. And it turns out, during the last 15 years, a lot of neuroscientists have been looking at this whole system. Initially, with Marcus Richelli and some other people were looking at it back in, let's say, 2001 and so on. Just having a hard time getting people to pay attention to it, so to speak. And I don't mean that in triple meaning. but this system seems to be pretty common among us all. However, there are variations among the ways that gets played out. His colleague, Yvette Scheelein, also at Washington University in St. Louis, have identified some depressive networks associated with the default mode network. So if you can think of it, we all spend 30% of our waking hours. Hopefully we're doing some creative thinking, we're putting together things, imagining what we might want to be doing, reviewing what happened last night, all those kinds of things we're doing all the time. What's happening for lunch? How come this guy isn't breaking for lunch right now? What's going on? All that stuff. But some people do stinking thinking there. Think of depressed people. They do a whole lot of rumination. It's like they get something stuck in their mind about somebody that treated them badly, and they probably did, and they can't get over it. Well, it was 3 years ago. Well, I still can't get over it. How dare him or her or whoever. And so our job is to help people use their default mode network in a much more creative way to move not only towards the future, but savor the present so they can enjoy their lives better. And that stinking thinking just doesn't seem to work so well. So we've got to acknowledge that we all have a tendency to go off, but where and how? So it's not like you can stop it. So when I was hanging around with the Ericksonians a lot in the 1980s, in the early 80s especially. So Milton Erickson was really big on this, you know, he died in 1981 or something like that, but his whole group were all into this idea of paying attention to the so-called ultradian rhythms. You know, that's when you can really help a person kind of slip into a so-called trance. more easily. And utilizing that in a non-directive sort of way, because he was into the so-called uncommon therapy. We're always doing that. We're always fading off, and you could see another person in your conversation kind of fade off every once in a while. Your clients do it. And we often, as therapists, ask the client, where did you just go right now? I noticed you started reflecting on something, so to speak. Where did you just go? Well, some people use their default mode network to come up with thoughts that they don't even know are their thoughts. They're somebody else's thoughts. So you could say to a client, it's natural and normal to fade off and reflect every once in a while. Try to make these periods useful by reflecting on ideas and impressions about what just occurred or positive and creative thoughts.